Good evening, good day, good morning to some of you, and welcome to this panel, The Challenges of Government Adoptation of AI. My name is Vijay Tirathrai. I'm your moderator for this panel. Allow me to just make a quick introduction of myself, and then I'll introduce the panelists themselves. I'm the Managing Director at Techstars Hub 71, and based here in Abu Dhabi. For the most part of the past 30 years, I've been an entrepreneur. I've founded several companies and scaled them, namely manufacturing of clothing, fashion retail, association management, property development, and venture capital. Today, and over the past few years, I've been pretty much an investor alongside with Techstars, investing in early stage tech companies. And Techstar is, for some of you who may not be familiar, is the global platform for investment and innovation. And over the past decade, we've amassed a portfolio of over 2,500 companies with a market value of $30 billion. So whilst we look for opportunities in tech companies, I have the privilege in the front row seat, if you will, to look for emerging technologies. One of the areas that has intrigued me is the use of AI in various applications, disrupting the different industries. So with me today is a panel that's addressing the challenges of the adoption of AI by the governments. So AI has increasingly making an impact for government. There's been a lot of talk over the past 5 years or so. For example, there is the Emma chatbot, which has been deployed by the US Department of Citizenship and Immigration Services. Several cities, city of Atlanta in the United States as well, using the Firebird framework. I can go on to name a few of these examples. But AI is not adopting as fast in the public sector as much as it is in the private sector. And what we see as barriers that are slowing down AI are, for example, number one, the ineffective use of big and diverse data sets that pulling that information together in a cohesive way is challenging. Or the short supply of data and management skills, AI management skills. Or the big fragmentation of the AI infrastructure and environment. Or the legacy for with non-agile systems preventing migration, or organizational culture and leadership, as well as perhaps procurement mechanisms where the interoperability between products of different AI providers. AI is still nascent, we recognize that, but the opportunity is tremendous and ground shifting in so many ways to the way we operate business, educate ourselves, as well as live as the 21st century for humankind. So with me is 4 amazing individuals who are experts in AI, who will address and unpack these issues for us in the next few minutes. So first and foremost, I'm going to call out the individuals to self-introduce themselves, basically taking the pain away from me, but also not to bore you to death with me speaking, is Ioan from Romania. Take a minute to introduce yourself, Ioan, and I'll go around the room.
Sure, thank you very much. And I would just want to start by saying that I'm, quite honored to be speaking with all of you today. Looking at your backgrounds and expertise, I think I myself can learn a lot. So hopefully this is just the first conversation and hopefully many to come. I'll just be brief about myself. I'm working now in AI, but as a background, I'm more of a generalist. I started as a management consultant many years back. And then gradually shifted towards either corporate management and entrepreneurship in various technology roles. In the US, I worked in an organization called the X Prize Foundation, where I had the chance of working with senior leaders in robotics, AI, and related fields. And since then, I started two companies. One, a cybersecurity company that works with government institutions and even public companies in several countries in Europe. And more recently, I got involved in a company that basically builds medical solutions and leverages AI and some sensory technologies, but the core part is AI. Maybe apart from that, which I think is relevant for this conversation, is that I recently I have co-founded an organization that is not public yet, but we'll definitely share with all of you, that aims to bridge several experts from several countries in Central Eastern Europe, mostly focusing in AI or emerging technologies. Here, just to serve as a platform for public-private communication. So I'll be talking about these maybe later on. Again, very happy to be here, and I hope to connect with all of you soon.
Thank you, Ioan, who's speaking from Romania. I'm moving on to Shannon Kehoe. Shannon is at present in Frankfurt. Welcome.
Thank you. So I'm Shannon Kehoe. I come from Philadelphia, United States originally. I have a Bachelor's of Science in International Affairs in German with a minor in economics from the Georgia Institute of Technology. And while there, kind of caught the bug, started programming a lot, doing a lot of statistics, and went on to get my Master's of Science and Analytics also from Georgia Tech. I worked for a couple of large e-commerce companies while I was in the United States. Kicked off a lot of different data analytics initiatives for Koch Industries. At that point, the second largest private company in the US. In 2019, I moved to Frankfurt, Germany, which is where I'm calling in from today. And I currently work as a data scientist focused on natural language processing issues for DTMS GmbH. In my spare time, I'm also on the advisory board for the MS Analytics program at Georgia Tech. And I also volunteer for the international NGO Women in AI as a city lead here in Frankfurt.
Shannon, it's a pleasure to have you and an honor as well. Thank you very much. Moving on to Mexico, we have Jesus Cepeda, who's a tech entrepreneur. Jesus, please introduce yourself.
Yes, thank you, Vijay. Thank you, Shannon, Ioan, and Vitaliy for being here and sharing this panel. I'm happy to be here. About the AI, I did a PhD in artificial intelligence and robotics back in 2012. So I'm a little bit rusty on the technical side, but I guess I understand how it works and how to implement it, particularly for solving public problems. So I took a deep dive into merging these algorithms and very scientific background using deep AI back in 2012 to the public sector. So back in 2016, we started a company that is called OSCity, where I'm the co-founder and CEO. And our purpose here is to help authorities tap into these emerging technologies to solve main public problems, mainly from a sustainable development approach, particularly SDG number 11, sustainable cities, and SDG number 16, more solid institutions. And from there on, we have been exploring how these technologies, how these algorithms can help governments to better understand, to be able to listen to everyone on the digital space and deliver better solutions in a more efficient and trustworthy approach.
Phenomenal, Jesus. Thank you very much. And then finally moving to the West Coast in the San Francisco Bay Area, Vitaliy, who I believe it's at 3 a.m. right there at the moment. So good morning to you and welcome. Please introduce yourself. I'm sorry, my friend, you are muted.
Hello, everybody. So my name is Vitaliy Goncharuk, and I have kind of two hats. First hat is what I'm CEO and founder of the company called Augmented Pixels. This company is developing technologies for autonomous navigation, for robotics, augmented reality, etc. So we have big clients. But my another hat, and that is why probably I'm here, is what I'm originally Ukrainian. And in my original country, I'm the head of AI committee of Ukraine. where we actually developing original documents for AI policies, and I'm also representing my original country in the Council de Europe, which has AI committee, and where we're developing policies for European Union, etc. So I hope my experience, like my practical experience, could be useful for this talk.
Most certainly. Thank you very much, and thank you for being here at this conference, as well as at this very particular hour. So let's begin. And I wanted to start with a question is, if you can share an example of a great use case of a very successful adoption of AI use in the public sector or by governments, would you speak to that? And if I can call perhaps Jesus and Vitaliy to comment on that question first.
Yeah, go first, Vitaliy, please.
Yeah, so I think if you're talking about using AI for the public sector and government, number one, for sure, it's the military. Military now actively using computer vision and such and other different technologies for like new generation of weapons. And I think we all can pick up many successful use cases from this field. If you're talking about public sector, I think a lot of successful cases we can see in using face recognition, face tracking technologies for identification of personality. And I think number three, it's a kind of fraud detection when for pension funds, etc. So I see some successful use cases in different countries in these areas.
All right, thank you.
To add on that, at OECD we have been using that for when you have no data. What we do is we tap into pre-existing or pre-trained algorithms in image recognition and natural language. Particularly to detect situations. For example, if you as a citizen can take a picture of some situation, let's say a pothole, a broken street light, some damaged service, you can immediately detect that. Remember when we tagged our friends on Facebook, and then Facebook suggested the names of our friends, so we can do that with the city. We can recognize a broken service, public service, a ravaged public space or damaged park, and we can detect that and automatically channel that to the corresponding authorities. So you can make much more agile from recognizing an emergent need to repairing that. So that on the service delivery. Then if we think most of the public servants, at least what they should do is to follow the law. So most of the processes are the same once and again. So this is a very inhuman approach of working. That it's a very repetitive work. So most of the times you can just put an algorithm to repeat those processes and try to bring these human-like interfaces, like a bot, for example, to make more agile the process of adding some kind of license or any bureaucratic process with the government. And the third approach is to make faster the decision making. For example, applying to an unemployment support, you can make it much more efficient and much more transversal from an approach of data. You can make analysis bigger, broader, and faster. So these are kind of the examples where we have been tapping, but there are plenty of uses. For example, I've seen uses of contextual awareness. There's a case in Las Vegas where they analyzed tweets to see pictures of people taking to the food. To detect poison food from one provider that was taking a lot of people into the public services of health. So you can save money on public health if you detect that things from a contextual awareness approach and spending patterns, and when there are more approaches to be exploring there.
I would like to come back a little bit more and drill on what you said about moving a higher frequency and faster and more. But let me just check in with Shannon and Ioan. Did you want to add to perhaps other examples of success in other areas?
So I heard facial recognition was mentioned a couple of minutes ago, and there have been certainly some successes in that field. In the US, I know it's a little bit more of a hot topic in terms of not just how the data, the algorithms are applied, but specifically in terms of how the data is collected and how the algorithms are trained, and where the data is sourced from. For example, an algorithm or the system that is deployed is only as good and as open as the people that are building it. And the NIST recently published a study of, I believe, about 98 different algorithms that were used for facial detection, one-to-one and one-to-many. And they saw that algorithms actually that were trained in the US were not as able to detect, or not as well able to detect African Americans or Asian faces, as well as some of the algorithms that were trained in Asia. So there's a lot of success in that area as well, but you still have to be careful, and sometimes just in terms of where the data is coming from and making sure you're feeding in.
So Shannon, interject. Is it what I'm hearing also? Is it because there are some inherent biases?
Exactly.
Those algorithms that are producing a, say, Western view or an Eastern view of the data set. So if you have, you know, 1 million data points, but depending on how it's trained, there is the human influence.
Exactly. There's still this human influence, and there's a difference between the training data and the testing data that you're using to actually construct the model initially, and then where you go deploy it. That's kind of the point I was trying to make. There's kind of a mismatch we're seeing in the US with that.
Great. And I also will circle back about the security and ethical issues later on. I just want to unpack about the next question is really, why do governments feel, what are the friction points that they typically feel that they're dealing with? Is it the ineffective use of the data? Is it the infrastructure legacy issues? Why is it so difficult for governments to adopt AI as quickly as the private sector? And by the way, I've just been notified by the audience to speak a bit louder into the mics, so we can just raise our voices. That'd be great. Thank you.
In my opinion, I think it's a more, if I were to put a more philosophical point on the table, I think the governments or government agencies or entities have always been a bit more reluctant to use whatever new tools they have, despite the fact of sitting on mountains and mountains of data or relevant other elements. So in my opinion, I think it really depends on if you're talking about the government of Singapore, for instance, versus the government of Romania, where I'm from. I think there's a big difference of how these people approach any novelty. In my opinion, I think the early adopters in the government space of AI as a whole has been more on the security side of things, either national security, but also what basically my colleagues said, things like facial recognition, behavioral analysis, and all of those things. And in my opinion, I think there's a huge potential to optimize the operational side of things. But on the other hand, there's this debate of private versus public and where innovation fits better at home.
Right. Vitaliy, go ahead.
Yeah, maybe I can add something to this, because we recently inside of the committee developed the concept of AI development of Ukraine, and now this document is under the review of most of our ministers of the country. So that is why I have a lot of insights, like what the government like or what doesn't like. So because I'm personally negotiating this paper with like 24 ministers of the country. I think their main concern, and by the way, recently, like Oxford Insights put Ukraine like #1 in Eastern Europe as an AI provider. So they calculated number of companies in the region and found what in Ukraine we have #1 AI companies in the region. So I'm not talking about kind of old, like something not developed, but we have developed very developed field of AI in the country. So most of our ministers They concern about power. They concern how AI could change their balance of power of their power inside of the government. This is number one concern. And second concern is who will make this final decision. So they want to make sure what when we supplying any algorithms to the government, in any case, it will be somebody who will be responsible for this decision. And there are a lot of kind of solutions for this, like you can develop some regulation documents, regulation entities. But I think there are two main concerns: how AI balance the power, and who will be responsible for decision making. Like, who is it still a human, or it will be AI? And if AI, then who is held responsible for some terrible mistakes?
So you brought a very, very interesting point. I think it's almost like, you know, what is the governance structure, if at all needed, to provide oversight on the development and the implementation or deployment of these AI systems within the public domain as well as the private domain? That's a question that I think one needs to address, because then how do you prevent the potential abuse, you know, of the wrong hands getting onto that? So that's what I'm hearing you saying. You want to respond to that?
It should be, in any case, found some balance between who actually develop AI algorithms, first of all, because for to solve some problems, you can just license third-party solution from like global suppliers. You can go to, I don't know, to United States, to United Kingdom, to India, to any countries, to Romania, and license some solution. But for some cases, you can just because it's a question of national security. You need to have your own solution provider, because you need to control some very specific technologies.
So that's a great segue to a question that I was going to ask, and brought by Abraham from the audience as well. Mm-hmm. That you know, how do you address data privacy and security concerns, right? And there seems to be a mindset among, you know, by governments to have a very territorial, you know, data should not be in the cloud, but should be on-premise, for example, or having data centers in terrestrial areas that they have, you know, authority over. Speak to me about those issues. Jesus,
you're addressing this to me?
I'm going to address it to Jesus and maybe Shannon.
Cool.
Yeah. So thinking about that, for example, from our perspective, you don't need to tap into private information of individuals to take out a good outcome from artificial intelligence. So as I said, you just analyze images from the public spaces. You analyze language or written messages from a digital space without necessarily tapping into who wrote that information. Maybe you just want to know the neighborhood, and you disaggregate this information or aggregate this information in order to cover that private part. And in that sense, there is a more paved road to implement artificial intelligence. And also, I like that there's a concern around that. You can say data privacy, security concerns, but there's also the sensitive use of this. And for this, I'll use an example of Microsoft using artificial intelligence in the government of Salta in Argentina. I don't know if are you aware of this implementation, what they do? So what we tried to do, and it was a very, very, very interesting problem. It turns out that the city of Salta, they have a very high number compared to other cities in Argentina of teenagers' pregnancy. So this is they give economical support to these people. So they were analyzing how to reduce these numbers in order to do some savings. So, and they analyzed the characteristics or socio-demographical, economical characteristics of individuals, and they sent a paper saying like, hey, you have a 80% probability of having a daughter pregnant during their 15 years or less. So imagine receiving that, even if you're not married. So that's sensitive. So that's usually associated with a rejection from parts of the citizens. Like, I don't want to see this, or how do I? You're telling me to run away, or how should I take care of my daughters, right?
you're touching on more of an ethical and moral issue there, which I like to explore as well. But I really want to address more about data privacy. From the citizens' perspective, but also security concerns, from leakage to exploitation of monetizing data sets by private enterprises, for example. I really, are these real issues that are preventing governments to move forward? That is what I want you to address.
Yeah. Well, just to close what I was saying, and I agree with you that this may be an ethical issue more than a private issue, but actually the outcome is on the ethical side, but the income, where the algorithms are tapping, it's on the private information of citizens. So how do you know that about me? Oh, because I analyze your information, your economical background, your where you live, how you move, where are your surroundings, and this gives me an outcome of any percentage of the teenager pregnancy. So this is the ethical outcome is just a result of tapping into private information. So I guess this is where the challenge is in terms of fostering adoption instead of fostering rejection, right?
Well, I like your tagline, technology is for social good and good governance. So we'll pause there for a second. Shannon, what's your take on security and privacy?
So that's actually a problem I work with quite a bit because as part of the GDPR regulations and such, any personal data that we save must be anonymized immediately, actually, before we're even able to save it near us. But working with text data, that becomes a very interesting problem. Because what exactly, anonymization means you can never trace it back to the originator of the data, the data subject. But if I write in an email to someone that I have a bachelor's of science from Georgia Tech in international affairs and a master's of science from Georgia Tech in analytics, there aren't too many people that have done both of those programs, particularly seeing as the master's of science is relatively new. So you can take out my name, you can take out my birthday, but if somebody hacks in and sees that email, those two pieces of information, I'm very easily identified from that. So it's a concern of, from the government perspective, even something as seemingly benign as that, you can use it to trace back to other sources of data that maybe you've hacked from elsewhere. I know in Germany, you've seen a good adoption of AI in industry, but the government itself has been very, very slow to adopt AI because they have there's this legacy from the DDR time of the last time, essentially, a lot of personal data was collected at scale, and seeing, even without some of the technologies that we have today, what was done with that data then. So there's already kind of in Germany this negative experience with collecting personal data. And so, as soon as you bring it up, the door kind of just closes. It's not, I would go so far as to say, it's not a conversation that a lot of people here are ready to have.
Well, in Germany, my personal experience is, I asked my German friends, so why do you still use cash? And I had a very interesting response as well. I do not want my transactions on a credit card to be traced by the banks or, for that matter, the government. Mm-hmm. Who knows who's watching? And back to Jesus' point, he made his quote earlier at the beginning. He says, to listen to everyone. And I thought that's a pretty scary idea of the government has the ability to listen to everyone, which we all agree to. But where is the balance between the ability to listen for the sake of making progress, progress in society, for growth, for change, for better quality of living? And is there a balance? Is there a line that one can draw, says, at the expense of privacy, at the expense of anonymous data, let's call it this way, that we should be all, as individuals, willing to give up for the greater good? So who wants to take this? Shannon, go ahead.
Sounds good. So I generally think of anonymization as kind of this double-edged sword for exactly the reasons that you just discussed. The example that kind of comes to mind for me with what you've just discussed is more of the social the social net is what you can call it here in Germany versus in the US. So when I move to Germany, I give up a bit more of my salary to the government because I get other services back, such as healthcare. Healthcare is really the big one that I always think of. In time of Corona, you have something called Kurzarbeit here. So there's more security if you lose your job through circumstances that you can't control. And in the US, that's not something that you have. When you lose your job, you have to really fend for yourself. But it kind of speaks to the same issue you have with the state of privacy. If I'm willing to give up a certain amount of anonymization or a certain expectation there, how much can I get back? What does that relinquishment of freedom or of privacy have? What's the return on investment of that? And I think because AI is relatively new and because we haven't been collecting some of this data or we're afraid to, we haven't been able to analyze that problem and analyze that trade-off as much as maybe some people need to see before they're willing to commit to giving up some of that privacy right.
Okay, just switching gears a little bit, you know, on the readiness of government and public sectors to be adopting AI, what seems to be the friction point? Is it legacy systems? Is it organization culture, leadership, drive, budgets? Speak to me about what has been your experience. First Ioan and then perhaps Vitaliy.
Yeah, that's that's a good question. And again, I guess it depends on the geography and the level of government we're talking to. At least in my experience working with more on the public healthcare side, so on that side of the government, I think there's an issue of organizational culture, to put it like that, in a sense that they think in multi-year, multi-decade even timelines. So it's a bit harder to just speed things up. But also the fact that there is a matter of budget allocation and legacy providers existing in the system. This is something that I've been faced with, where you have a set of providers that assure the digital infrastructure of a specific government agency or public service. It takes a lot to actually get into that space. So either you work with one of those legacy providers if you're lucky, or you kind of wait for them to develop their internal capabilities. So that would be at least my personal.
Thank you. Thank you, Ioan. What, Vitaliy?
I don't think there is problem with some budgets because usually any government organization operates as kind of a business. So if you can speak on the same language, and if you can offer some AI solutions to solve some real problems and or decrease their costs or decrease human labor, etc., they usually like fine with this. I think the main problem for such organizations and main problem in general in integrating AI into the government is what you need to re-engineer business processes inside, and this is what they're usually not ready to do. So this is the main barrier when you're dealing with the government, not budgets.
So what I'm hearing is perhaps a lack of cohesive AI strategy to make that transformation happen. Is that what are you saying?
Sorry, it's hard to hear you. I don't know why, but I can hear you.
Yeah, I'll repeat what I said. So you made a very good point, and I just want to double down on that. What I'm hearing from you seems to be a lack of an AI strategy as opposed to budgets and resources. When I say AI strategy, being something very cohesive to take the transformation, if you will, from legacy systems to something that's driven by AI. Is that what?
Yeah, correct. Cool, agree.
Okay. So there's a question from the audience. How do you separate AI strategy from digital transformation? Is it the same? Do we look at it differently? How do you differentiate the understanding of that? Ioan?
I guess from a government standpoint, at least how I maybe an AI strategy encompasses a bunch of things, including the internal workings of the government, where digital transformation can be part of it. But in my opinion, an AI strategy at the government level should involve creating an ecosystem in that jurisdiction that encourages from early stage entrepreneurs to existing technology companies to build this ecosystem of AI solutions. So digital transformation is definitely a huge topic for governments as well, but an AI strategy is more of an all-encompassing term that is maybe focused on building an ecosystem, either in that country or multinational, especially in the context of the European Union and other organizations.
Right. Jesus?
Yes, thank you, Vijay. I guess it's important to understand why are we going digital. And this may add a little bit on what Vitaliy was sharing about the readiness. Here in Latin America, most of governments have fragmented budgets. So each government agency has a budget. And they use it discretionally. They use it for digital transformation. They use it for another strategy. And this creates inequality from a digital transformation point of view. And then when you think about AI, you think about having as much structured data as possible to deliver the best outcomes. But then you find the next problem, which is siloed data. In best cases, maybe there's no data, maybe there's no structure, but maybe there's a lot of siloed data across government agencies. So when you think about going digital from a government point of view, you need to think further and see why are you going digital? Is it just for having a more efficient approach to processes, or because you are actually thinking about leveraging or tapping into new technologies such as AI? So I will love to see governments thinking about digital transformation as a step towards an AI strategy, but I haven't seen that yet.
Right, and I think I like something that Ioan said is the building of the ecosystem to support the strategy. And I think what intrigues me is when you think about emerging tech startups, do they have a fighting chance in this transformation is taking place against the big tech companies? What's been your experience as entrepreneurs?
Vijay, may I add something important to previous question, if you don't mind?
Okay.
When we're talking about digital transformation in the government, it's usually about re-engineering of business processes and kind of IT solutions. But when we're talking about AI strategy, it's not only about digital solutions, it's about R&D. So for example, when we develop it and when we now have this AI of Ukraine, it's about what we setting up priorities for the National Academy of Science of Ukraine. So when we're talking and we're setting up priorities where they investing budgets into R&D. So again, there are different, we need to differentiate AI and digitalization because it's kind of different, even different areas. Sorry.
Well, thank you for bringing that up. I thought it was a very good point to make that distinction. So with Ioan's comment around building an ecosystem, I'm curious to find out, do startups like yourselves, like Jesus, and you've got your own companies, you're tech entrepreneurs, going out there, how's been the success rate in addressing this transformative landscape in AI by the government? Do you stand a chance in getting a piece of the business, or do you see that it's typically the big tech companies that's really driving the agenda for that transformation?
If you don't mind, I will tap on that. So one of the biggest challenges is trust. So there is a lot of political risk in using these kind of technologies, unknown technologies for most of the public servants, at least in Latin America. So this is why typically you see big companies there, because it's easier to see one of these big companies' logos behind a project, even if it represents a huge investment, than a startup logo that you maybe don't know. For this kind of easing or smoothing this path, and not only for us as a startup in the GovTech area, but also for others in the area to be able to implement. This year we launched what we call the govtechhub.org. the GovTech Hub, it's essentially an effort or an OECD initiative to build or tightly couple or structure or gear up this ecosystem. We have the academia, which is essentially the R&D parts that Vitaliy was referring. We have public servants, particularly from the innovation government agencies, and we have startups and also big companies. Most of the time, some of these startups are actually executing some of the projects of these big companies that cannot move as fast as they move if they are a startup. So we plug that all together. We believe that we are bridging the gap between the public sector and this kind of technology, such as AI. This is building an ecosystem, as Ian was saying, and this is one of the biggest challenges because you need to be part of something bigger so that you can be seen like a non-apolitical risk approach of technology.
I want to just, with that commentary, move more specifically into talent and people. So what has been your observations in dealing with the public sector with regards to organization culture or resistance thereof for adopting AI? Who wants to take that?
Yeah, it's in my, sorry. Sorry, I hope I haven't interrupted anyone. In my opinion, I actually am working with the government here on some initiatives related to AI. It's just that no one really knows what it means. Even senior people who are rather, fairly versed in technology, but they don't exactly understand what it means. It's a nice thing to put on your activity in your resume, and very few people actually grasp the potential and applicability of AI. But this may change because I'm seeing this in my expertise, more and more people coming within the public sector that have real life, even private sector expertise in technology, and they may have the ability to actually understand what the potential is and then how to apply it. Again, maybe I'm a bit biased. In my case, I think the major issue is that they don't have a good understanding of what it means and how it can be applied in their specific jobs.
Shannon, you want to speak to that?
I think the lack of adoption or the delay in adoption is still it is due to this misunderstanding between the digital transformation and the AI transformation. And AI is a nice buzzword to have, as you mentioned, Ioan. But where exactly that fits in the process sometimes gets lost in translation. So even I've seen people in industry, not necessarily in government, just improving the data collection pipeline, and then they've gone and called that AI. I've seen just an analytical regression, which it's not predicting anything. You're just trying to understand what moves together. I've seen that called AI. And so there's this, again, this disconnect between, there's the digitization that first comes across, where you collect the data, you collect the same data everywhere with the same granularity, and then you use that to make predictions. But it's the second flip that people seem to get confused on, and there's that disconnect.
And so that lack of understanding, I guess this is where people are just learning while the plane is being built in midair, so to speak. And because of how technology has evolved and the pace of adoption, both by the private sector and the public sector, is happening so rapidly that the people are not naturally trained. Those who are in the C-suite or in CEO positions to naturally understand this. And there's a lot of unpacking for them to do to really appreciate. Which brings me to the question of talent. Where do you see the concentration of great talent? I mean, I heard from Vitaliy that there's great talent in Ukraine, for example. But where do you see great talent, but also the lack of? And what are the jobs that you see in the future beyond, ML engineers or NLP engineers? What are we looking at as a key talent pool is needed for this AI transformation to take place effectively?
I think you need somebody that can see the big picture. So you need somebody that, we talked about silos earlier. Sometimes there's a reason in government for having different silos. You don't necessarily want one arm to see what the other's doing. But you still need someone to see the big picture that can look across the different areas and go, okay, this branch is going to be better suited to collect this type of data, which this other branch over here can then use. It may not be personal, it may not have any of these negative implications that we sometimes associate with that type of data. But that's one thing I've really seen missing is we have seen more and more of the ML engineers come through. I'm an NLP engineer. We've seen data scientists, but you still will always need someone that knows how to fit all those people together, even just in a small team of 4 people, and figuring out how to combine those skills properly to build up the pipeline, do the analytics, and then build a predictive model. That's something that I still haven't really seen done exceptionally well in some of the different areas that I've worked so far.
Vitaliy, you want to respond to that?
I think I'm agree with Shannon. So for sure we need more like STEM people who like ML engineers or AI engineers, but industries now are struggling without good business people who know how to deal with AI. So it should be this kind of parallel process and in government as well. So it should be some kind of parallel process when we increase pool of talents in R&D, but in parallel we investing in education of management, in marketing, etc. So we need more business people who are familiar with AI.
Right.
Sorry.
Go ahead, please.
No, just a quick note. Apart from what my colleagues said, which I fully agree with, I think might be interesting to see more people at the decision level, either in government or in government in public companies that understand the technical side. I'm not talking necessarily about engineers or AI engineers, but people who have a mindset of in the sciences, to put it like that, and then they can bridge between the technical solutions and the need that they have.
So
Go ahead.
To bounce off of that real quick, something that we've started doing at our company is when we have someone new join the business side of things, I generally try and within the first week, sit down with them and I call it like a buzzword intro. So stop throwing down, like stop saying Python or JavaScript or Docker or whatever. Let's take an hour. I'm going to go over briefly our top 10 tools so that when you're sitting with the developers in the daily scrum or in the sprint planning, you have a general idea of why this library in Python is better than that library and why this might be super hyped, but it's not good. I differentiate it between talking the talk and walking the walk. I don't expect my product owner to be able to walk the walk, sit down and program with me. But when I tell them this is going to take a long time because TensorFlow is releasing another update, they need to understand why. And so long as they have kind of a gut feeling for what that means and what it implies, that's fine. But you can't really get away with anymore letting the engineers go engineer. You have to be able to converse with them on some of these topics because they do have real business or people implications in the form of the government and such.
I do hope some heads of department or CEOs of government agencies as in this audience, because that's really valuable advice that you just shared, Shannon. We've got 2 minutes to wrap up. I've got 2 quick questions I want to ask you for each one of you. If you take Singapore, which has enjoyed a bit of good publicity around having a national AI strategy, and they're really fast tracking the adoption of facial recognition for a lot of the government agencies, as an example. If you were to pick one city in the world where you think if you're given the either the mayor job or the prime minister job, if that's a city-state, where would you pick? And why do you think that city has that level of readiness to adopt AI? So this to everyone.
Well, if I can jump in, I guess, and I hope I don't sound too romantic, but this is why I'm based and focused in Latin America. I think Latin Americans' lacks of readiness is what has me here. I love to prepare things to be ready to go. Perhaps maybe instead of just leapfrogging to just going to digitization or digital transformation, leapfrogging into directly AI strategies or emerging technology strategies. So here, every time you tap into a government or tap into any city and you try to make them understand what Shannon was saying, like why is it important to understand at least the essence of technologies, because you cannot subtract yourself or your city from the influx. Technology is there, so you need to tap on that. Once you make them understand, then there is a huge impact on the lives of citizens. And living that, it's a huge sense of purpose. And that fulfills me really well. So I love to be working here in Latin America.
All right. Thank you, Jesus.
Vijay, I forgot the name of the city in UAE where it's like everything full automated. It's like close to Abu Dhabi. I went to the city like 2 years ago.
Is it Mazda?
Yeah. So I will choose this city. Yeah.
All right, thank you. Ioan or Shannon, go on.
Go ahead, Ioan.
Thank you. I mean, honestly, I would choose a city in Romania such as Cluj, because it has like a disproportionate amount of younger people and educated more on the science side, working not in advanced fields, but still a disproportionate amount of younger open-minded people and access to European Union funds and other free money to implement projects. And I think there's also the fact that it's not as digitalized as possible. I think it's a good opportunity there. But then I need a magic wand to make things happen and change various mentalities and things like that. But yeah, I think it's in the realms of possibility. So that's what I would choose.
And Shannon?
I would choose probably Berlin because there is a growing presence. There's a lot of startups there. It has a culture of experimentation, but it does kind of, as I spoke to earlier, have this legacy of how AI can go wrong, even without the AI being there yet. And so if I were able to make like a data analytics office in Berlin, as was done in New York, or excuse me, in a city, I would do it in Berlin because they're ready for it. And I think if you phrased it as, let's set an example of how to do this right, you would see the adoption there pretty quickly.
Well, thank you for that. Lastly, and just as parting words, imagine you are, your audience right now is the cabinet of the various countries that you represent in your mind. And you've been asked, one piece of advice, just one piece of advice, 10 seconds, what they need to listen to you as experts in AI for them to be effective in the adoption of AI. What would be that one advice? Vitaliy, you want to jump in first?
Okay. I think my advice is very simple. AI is a kind of weapon of the future. And using AI, countries soon will compete, not only in the military field, but in very different fields. So countries really should adopt AI and found their focus in AI to be competitive in a new world.
Thank you.
I would just say that it's not a buzzword or something exotic. It's a must-have, or will be a must-have very soon across all government fields. So they should consider it as fast as possible.
I would emphasize consistency and balance. So if you're going to start collecting new data, for example, street addresses for businesses or something, collect it the same everywhere. So in Berlin, Munich, if you're collecting the same type of data, make sure it looks the same when it comes in. That will make your life so much easier if you need to unite those data sets later on. And then branching off of that a little bit, I would make sure that we also focus on representation. So make sure that the data that you're collecting, if, for example, if it's related to people, that it represents the different subpopulations in the country as well. So don't just oversample here and undersample over there.
Good point, Shannon.
Yeah. And on my side, I will say that we have been bombarded with this idea that if we don't pay for a digital service, then we are the product. So use your digital interactions, understanding that we are the product of our cities and our countries, so that we can actually serve them instead of getting at risk with them in terms of privacy.
Well, I'm afraid we're up for time. Thank you for the responses, panelists. To the audience, thank you for being with me on this topic on the adoption by the government of AI.